Trails Program webinar. So my name is Lauren Pyle. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Outdoor Recreation Grants Manager for the Department of Forest, Parks, and Recreation. And I am joined today by the two other members of our grants team. I'll pause and give them a quick chance to say hello that are here today. And so, Joe, we'll go ahead and start with you.
Hello, everyone. Joe Kill. New to the team, but pretty excited to be here. And I think that's about all I.
Thanks, Joe. And then I'll go ahead and turn it over to Marlena to say hi and to get us started.
Yeah, hi everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Marlena Baker, she, her pronouns. I am the Outdoor Recreation Grants Specialist along with Joe, and we're happy to have you all here. But we do have a lot of information, like Lauren said, so we can jump right into the agenda. So today we'll begin by sharing just some general information about RTP or the recreational program. We'll also give an overview of the timeline and process that you might expect this year. We'll also get into some eligibility criteria in terms of both applicant criteria as well as the projects that are eligible and fundable under this grant. I will then offer some helpful information about the project planning and design, and then also touch on some tips and tricks about actually completing those pre-application materials. We'll also share some compliance requirements and some additional resources, and then we'll have some time at the end, like Lauren said, for Q&A for folks to answer, to ask, and we can answer some questions. Also, we'll add that most of this information today can be found in the RTP project development and pre-application guidance document. That is live on the website, but we'll be sure to get you a link to that today as well. Slide, please. Perfect. So digging into just some information about the Recreational Trails Program, aka RTP. It is a federal program that provides annual funding to Vermont communities for the development and restoration of public recreational trails. It is a reimbursement grant that is funded by the U.S. Federal Highway Administration, and this will be the 16th year that Vermont will offer this program, and that'll bring the total funds awarded to be over $9 million of supporting trail projects. This year, we expect to award about $500,000 total on the community grant round. There is a 20% match requirement, and that means that applicants must be able to commit a 20% minimum match, aka 20% of the estimated total project cost. And then lastly, there is a maximum request for $50,000, but there is not a minimum estimate. So looking at these funding goals, these goals do support the Vermont Statewide Comprehensive Outdoor Recreation Plan, also known as SCORP, which some of you might be familiar with. The first goal is to strengthen the quality, extent, and resilience of existing outdoor recreation resources. Also, we hope that this funding creates and supports trails that welcome all who live and visit in Vermont and allow them to heal, learn, grow, and live their lives fully. FPR also hopes that this opportunity will promote stewardship of outdoor recreation resources and enhance both trail user experiences and environmental quality. And then finally, we hope that this offers and encourages all trail enthusiasts to work together and provide a wide range of recreational trail opportunities that fulfill community needs. So now that we have a general overview of RTP, we can dig a little bit more into the details about the process. So here we are looking at a timeline for the 2025 RTP round. So the program officially launched yesterday on the 14th, and that really kicked off this pre-application phase, which is where we are right now. Pre-apps will be live and open for submission until December 6th of 2024. And then in about late December, folks who submitted completed pre-applications will be notified and also invited to submit a full application, which will be due January 31st, 2025. So once those submissions are in, that'll lead right into the review process, and that'll last between February and March of 2025. And during that time, selections are being made, and our team will notify you directly about the selected applicants and those final decisions that were made. Then we move into April of 2025, and between then and July, that will be when staff will work with those selected grantees to start building out those grant agreements. And then hopefully by July 14th of 2025 is when projects will be starting to begin, and then we anticipate them to be completed by December 31st of 2026. So as you look through or saw on the previous slide timeline, you might notice that there are just certain phases that take multiple months at a time, and that's just because there's a lot of things that are happening behind the scenes in between different phases. And so we won't walk you through this entire process today, but this is really just to show you like a visual that there's just like a lot of things happening behind the scenes and leading up to that project selection and implementation phase. So we just really appreciate your patience as we work through all of these processes. But to bring us back to today, we are currently in the application phase, like I said, which is why we are all here today, and what will be the focus of today's webinar. So moving into the eligibility requirements, to submit an application, you must be one of these eligible groups, and that includes municipalities, nonprofits, and governmental entities. And that includes state or federal government agencies, as well as tribal governments. Use of eligibility. So federal legislation does mandate that RTP funds must be allocated across 3 different categories, and those are the motorized, non-motorized, and mixed use uses. So 30% of non-motorized trails receive funding. 30% of funding goes to motorized trail use, and then 40% goes to multi-use trails. Multi-use is defined by a combination of 2 or more types of activities. So that could be walking and mountain biking, it could be walking and Nordic skiing, just as long as it's a combination of 2 or more activities. There are some limitations in terms of the amounts requested. So $50,000 is the maximum amount for non-motorized projects, but there is no maximum for motorized projects. So getting into project eligibility, RTP does fund a pretty wide range of projects, but a few that we'll call out here include maintenance and restoration of existing trails. Also construction of new trails with certain limitations for projects on federal lands. You can also build and rehabilitate a trailside, trailhead amenities, facilities, and parking areas. And we'll say that the trail amenities do include things like signage, kiosks, composting toilets, recycling receptacles, and those other structures along trails. Land acquisitions are eligible for RTP funding, but more specifically, the acquisition of trail easements or fee simple titles to property with trails or recreational trail corridors. And then lastly, educational projects are fundable, with the caveat that there is a limited amount of funds that could go towards these project types. So just to keep that in mind. Also, in terms of eligibility, this year, the ranking committee will also consider a few specific grant priorities during the selection process. Things like organizations that did not receive funding last year in RTP round will have a little bit of a priority and preference over grants. Projects that also include remedying deferred maintenance or rehabilitation will also be given preference over new creation or improvements. And then lastly, RTP projects will be intentionally selected to support both geographic diversity across the state and also diversity of trail type uses. Which leads us to the trail type eligibility here. This is just a list of a few trails that are eligible. Like we mentioned, RTP does fund a pretty wide range of projects. So this list is not a complete list, but it does kind of capture the fact that RTP funding does focus really on those like recreational uses as its primary purpose. And then moving into things that are not eligible. So things like condemnation of property is not fundable through RTP. You cannot have motorized vehicles on non-motorized trails. You cannot build trails on prohibited land or on land that does not have land over permission. Transportation-focused improvements like bike lanes as well as sidewalks and road improvements also are not eligible. Things like picnic tables, front country campgrounds, and play equipment aren't fundable through RTP. Also, freestanding recreation or park resources, feasibility studies, or standalone planning is not eligible. Promotion, marketing, and advertising efforts also are not fundable through RTP. And then things like law enforcement, general acquisition, fundraising, and lodging and food also are not eligible. Although the RTP program doesn't fund these types of programs, we will be launching a land and water conservation fund very, very soon, which is a program that does fund some of these projects. So just keep an eye out for that coming very, very soon. So with that, I'm going to pass it to Lauren, who will give us a little more detail on the program and also share a new initiative for this year.
Thanks, Marlena. So yeah, RTP is a very long-standing program, and we did make some pretty decent changes last year in terms of what our priorities are or other pieces. And this year we are maintaining those changes from last year in what we're calling the standard RTP track. But recognizing that this summer really changed a lot of things, just in many ways like last summer did in terms of flood impacts on trails for communities across the state, our team started to think critically. And we have this tiny pocket of state funds that have been awarded every year through the RTP program to help supplement the federal dollars that come in for trail-related purposes. And this year, we're actually working to pivot those funds to create a very small flood recovery track. We recognize that the $74,000 that we have through this program is nothing compared to the millions of dollars of damage that have happened in trails across the state this summer and in many ways still from the previous summer. But this was the funding we immediately had available that we could have control over to change it. And so what we're doing with this funding is creating a flood recovery track this year. And so some things to know about that is that this is for projects that are completed this summer. from this summer's floods. So it's projects that started as of July 10th this year that are going to be completed before the application end date at the end of January. So this is for already done work. And this is unique. Normally, RTP can't fund any past work. It all has to be future. So this is something special about this track. We are anticipating out of the $74,000 pot, we really do have this goal to spread this funding around to organizations because we know that many groups in many communities felt these flooding impacts. And so we're anticipating funding 4 to 5 projects with an average award of $15,000. That being said, we know that the project points vary. There are probably going to be groups that really only needed, say, $7,500 or $10,000, and other groups that need $30,000. And so we haven't put a hard and fast cap on it, but it is a goal of ours to spread it around. But we're saying, please don't submit proposals less than $7,500 because we learned through the flood recovery track that we had through the VOREC community grant program last year that less than that, there's just an administrative burden on people. And we've heard that that's hard to do. And so we recognize that at that $7,500 price point and up, it's going to be the benefit is going to outweigh the additional work to administer that fund. Particularly for the grantees. And that's really the biggest piece, is particularly for the grantees, that the reporting, the reimbursement, all those things, it's easier to do. It feels like a better fit at that point. For the flood recovery eligibility, it has to be all the same eligibility for projects that Marlena just shared. So that is going to be the big piece. We're still looking at trail maintenance. We're still looking at all the types of recreation. We're still looking at all those pieces in terms of the eligibility costs. It all still applies. And really the biggest pieces in terms of compliance is that projects needed to have been permitted that were completed or confirmed that they didn't need permits. And you need to have signed landowner permissions for those projects. And so applicants can submit to one track, the other, or both. That is going to be a thing this year, is that you can do both, and that eligibility in one track is not going to impact consideration in the other. And we recognize this, that floods happen localized, right? In the same communities that hit with, say, needing to put their bridge back in a flooded community may have already had a trail project planned for another area. So the projects could be at the same site or the different site. And so with the recommendation of the Vermont Trails and Greenways Council, as well as who serves as an advisory group to the recreational trails program, as well as advice within FPR, we're recognizing that consideration in one won't impact consideration in the other, but they do have to be submitted as separate proposals. And that's important just because it's really hard to tease apart, well, what's flood recovery? When did it happen? And we have some pretty clear distinctions within the pre-application guidance to help you figure out which track do I fit if you have a project that's related to flooding. But we've been talking about the pre-application the whole time. And so what are you going to need to do? There are 5 documents that you need to submit as part of a pre-application. And so it's a pre-application form, which is a quick fillable Adobe form this year, your name, your organization, your address, high-level description information is what we're looking for. And it's a quick kind of fill in the bubbles and maybe write a couple of sentences. We are asking for a work plan, which we have templates available on the website, as well as a budget. And then the 2 other pieces that we're looking for are a climate resilience risk form and your permit navigator or project review sheets. And with this pre-application, we're going to have a whole other webinar that just digs into what are we looking for in each of these documents? How do you fill out the forms? But when we're looking at these materials from FPR, we're going to be bringing these pieces in. And when you submit pre-applications, we're trying to make them as streamlined as possible to check for 4 things. First is eligibility. Does the applicant and the projects meet the requirements of the program? And sometimes that's pretty cut and dried, and we can just tell you that up front if you have a question. There was a question in the chat. Are public schools eligible? Yes, we can do that, right? And it's easy for us to tell. Sometimes there are things that maybe are a little stickier. We're like, oh, well, this piece isn't eligible, but if you apply for the rest, it's okay. Or there are pieces last year we learned that as Marlena shared, freestanding recreation resources that are not connected to trails, say like skate parks or pump tracks for biking. Those, if they're just by themselves, aren't eligible for RTP. And that's a Federal Highway Administration decision, not an FPR decision question. But we learned that last year. And so it was a great opportunity to skim through all the applications and say, are they eligible before people go through the work of putting together a full proposal? We're also checking to see if the project is feasible, if it has a high probability of success. We're looking for readiness because RTP has a pretty narrow window of implementation. And we recommend like the first season is for permitting, the second season is for construction, but we want to see that there is a pretty solid plan in place for this. And then we want to make sure that any of the projects submitted are meeting all the federal requirements. And so if you're wondering a little bit more about like what each of these things mean, our pre-application guidance does go into all of these in much more significant detail. But we want to just touch on two of them. And they're kind of the ones that people have asked us about a little bit more of. What is feasibility? How do we evaluate this? And so things that we're looking for during this pre-application review phase with it is that we're looking for projects that are achievable within the period of time and within the amount of money that is available. And so we're looking for things that like, yes, it fits within the budget parameters. It looks good. And to remind people to say like, ask for what you need. Like, let's make sure that budget is realistic. And if you have a project that is, say, larger than this $50,000 cap on non-motorized projects for your ask, can you segment it? Are there pieces that you can move into discrete chunks to say, ask for this now, and then consider applying in a future year for another part of it later? But it's still going to be fully accomplishable just in this first phase. And so it's an opportunity for us to think through that. The other piece with feasibility that we look into is that the project is permittable and that the outdoor recreation benefit outweighs any negative environmental impacts. And some of the tools that we use to do that are those permit reports. If we get a permit navigator report or a project review sheet and it says you need 57 permits, I'm exaggerating. But that's a lot, right? Like that's a lot of work. And we're starting to say, is that environmental impact potentially outweighing the community benefit? And all of that is evaluated on a case-by-case basis and ultimately goes through an FPR really thoughtful review. And so those are types of things that we're looking for versus if we see permit reports, we're like, oh, it needs wetlands and stream alteration. Like those are really common permits for trails and trail related projects. And so if we see those, we go, yes, this project is exactly what we'd expect for a trail one. And so if you have any questions with permits, like we'll get into that in a little bit, but we're always here to help. But these are the things we're kind of looking for with feasibility, is that the budget is on point. Because if you tell us like, I'm going to build a 100-foot long engineered metal bridge for $10,000, we're going to look at that and go, that doesn't seem like a real budget. Where's the information to back it up? Because it feels like based on our granting history that you need a lot more than that. And so if you do have pieces where you're like, no, we can do it for less, just make sure you communicate that in your pre-application materials so that we know you've done your due diligence, because you all are the experts in this. When we think about readiness, some of the pieces we're digging into is that we're looking for a clear plan. RTP funds shovel-ready work. And so we really need to see that that plan is ready to go once it's funded. And so if you are more in the planning or the design phase, like we'd like to have a trail that goes from point A to point B, but we really don't even know where it's going to go, RTP is not the fund for you yet. What we encourage you to do is to explore other sources to get that planning and scoping work completed, other funds. And then once you have a plan, RTP can help fund it in a future year. This program has been running annually for years. And so we're looking for things like you have that concrete plan, you know where it's going to go. What are you going to do? You have the landowner permission or a plan to secure it. Kind of new this year, we're going to go into like you have a plan to address any climate resilience risks. And your plan really does directly address your permit needs. We also want to see that your plans have gotten any necessary input from professionals to inform that plan. And so I'll be the first to say you don't want me designing your trail, right? Like I don't have trail building experience. I have grant administration experience, but not trail construction experience. And so you want to make sure that like whether you have people with professional expertise who are volunteers, who are on your staff, who are in your partner networks, or who are, paid contractors that you've worked with to help develop your plan, that you have professional expertise, because there are standards that really do inform trails, that when you follow these standards and best practices, we've seen, particularly through the flooding events of the last 2 years, that the trails that are following the best up-to-date practices, like these are the trails that are having the least amount of damage, are these newly reworked ones. So there's really a long-term benefit for you of having this professional expertise up front. And we want to know, so the last piece about project readiness is we're looking for the public support that's there. And so we're going to be kind of skimming through this at the pre-application phase and then digging in again at the full application. So if you're already starting to think about like, well, what, you might have a project in mind, or you might just be here to learn about the program. One of the things that we've been asked for in the past is really just like an overview of like, what is easier and what is harder for RTP. For this program, because as we've mentioned, this is a program that is administered by the Federal Highway Administration. And there are a lot of federal rules for this. And some things just are an easier fit with less work than others. It doesn't mean that those things aren't ineligible, but that they can be harder to do. And so when we think about project types, right, like the things that are easiest to do, I just want to kind of run through these at a high level. Things that are maintenance within the existing footprint. So working within your trailhead, within your trail corridor. Those tend to be really easy. There's not a lot of new permitting things. A historical review is not really an important additional consideration. If you're just doing work where things have already happened in the past, it becomes kind of an easier piece to do. If you're expanding an existing trail network or building on and expanding your resources, that is, sometimes there's a little bit more permitting involved. Sometimes it's a little bit more planning, but it's very easy through it. New construction. By the time you're getting to new construction, there's generally a few more steps for RTP. RTP will fund it. It's a great funding source, and it will cover just about anything you need related to new construction. But the farther we get towards the right-hand side, the more you want to kind of plan into your budget and your mental timeline of the amount of support and administrative work that this is going to take. So by the time you get into land acquisitions, there's a huge human input in terms of reviewing titles and ensuring compliance and appraisals and those sorts of things. It's all fundable, but just make sure you're building that into your project administration. Things that are design build combos can be a little bit more challenging. We know some projects are inherently design build. RTP has funded pump tracks attached to trail networks so that, you could be riding on the trail, pop into the pump track, and then pop back off and keep going on your ride. So RTP does fund that. And some things like that are sometimes a design build, like where the pump track's gonna go, and that's what you have there. But generally there's an additional step of like, once you have that plan, you have to submit it to FPR for approval, even if you've gotten a grant, to be able to move on to the construction phase. And the thing that is kind of within RTP, really the hardest piece, both in terms of the administration as well as considerations from previous ranking, are projects that are 100% education related. I'm a former educator myself. I understand really the value and the importance of education. It's just within the RTP portfolio, like we are restricted at the federal level that only no more than 5% of our funds can go to education. And even then it's very specific education topics related to trail safety and trail education. And so with that, sometimes those education projects really can be a harder fit for RTP. Doesn't say they're not eligible, but it's just something to go into and really think critically about. Who does the work also, we've heard in the past from grantees, makes a difference in terms of how easy these projects are to administer. If your goal to do really your project is we're going to contract a professional and they are going to do the work, really the upfront investment is that contracting piece. And FPR does have some really specific requirements about contracting, but once they're contracted, it happens. It's pretty easy. The invoicing is really clean. We've just heard it's an easy process. Same with kind of contracted trail crews. It's that one labor piece oftentimes, but sometimes there's separate materials, which are more pieces. Then you're moving to staff, you've got skilled volunteers. And again, just like our project, it doesn't mean like don't do this. It just means like if you're doing something that tends to be a little bit trickier for RTP, build that into your plan and budget, that you know who your project administrator is and that you have funding in your budget to help support them. Just because it is more work to be able to do that if your project is selected. We've shared that the climate resilience risk form was part of the pre-application. This is a new material for RTP this year. And it is not to say like yes or no, should this project be funded or not, but it's to help us have a better understanding all around across the trails community about what are the potential localized impacts for climate resilience for this specific project. And so it's a 2-page questionnaire, and we have a whole guidance set that breaks down all the pieces. But really our goal in offering this is twofold. You know, it's going to help our staff and the ranking committee assess the resilience of the project and its readiness. And our goal is to help point out things to grant applications or grant applicants about our project to help promote more resilient projects. And that's like the overarching purpose. It's a document that we'll be using in both the pre-application and full application phases. And specifically for the pre-application, where we're going to be using this is in part to assess readiness. So this form has checkboxes that you just say, you know, what is your trail surface? Is your trail within 50, you know, or your resource within 50 feet of an established floodplain? If it's good, is your trail going to cross a water body? If so, how many crossings? So it's kind of this like checklist to go through, to think through. And we're going to be using this checklist in part to assess readiness, because there are certain questions within that form that we have offered unknown. You don't know yet. One of the questions asked if there are spots that you might experience puddling within the trail. And I mean, depending on what the weather's like during the pre-application phase of your availability, you might have a chance to go out and walk your trail to say, yes, I see places where we have puddling, where the water is gathering in certain sections of the trails. And you might be able to say yes, but if it's really dry after this, you know, kind of slushy, drizzly bout that we're having right now, if it's really dry for the rest of the period or your schedule doesn't line, you might click unknown for that. And that's okay. If during that pre-application phase, that's fine to click unknown where we've offered the checkbox. Where we're going to be looking for readiness is that all of those questions within that form are required. And if you skip half of them, or if say, we write in unknown on questions where that wasn't a provided option, that's going to be a red flag for us to review and really like think critically with our team about. When you say like, well, what is the trail surface? Unknown. How many water crossings? Unknown. And for us, that's just a flag that it's not that it's a bad project. It's this that you need more planning first because of the restrictions that we're working under to be able to fund those shovel ready projects, to be able to get them done on time. It's also going to be an opportunity for us to flag things to help make applications stronger in our staff review during the pre-application phase. You know, for example, we might say, you know, we notice that you're using water bars to help move water off of the trail. Just make sure that in your plan for ongoing stewardship, which is an application question in the full application, we'll say, well, in that question, just make sure that you address your plans to clean out and maintain those water bars, because water bars can't just be like built and done in perpetuity, right? If you're saying, oh, well, part of our plan because we have all this puddling, we can't change it, is we want to close it to say certain user groups or to trail users during certain seasons, right? Like we're not going to have the single track open during mud season. And if that's the case for you, that's okay. But we want to see that in your ongoing stewardship plan then of like, how are you going to educate trail users? And so we're going to call out things for you. It's just like, okay, we see this in there. Make sure you have a plan to address it. Because it's not that we can't fund projects that have potential for higher climate related impacts. It's just that we want to see that the plans, either like your bridge design, if it's a water crossing, your bridge design is big enough so that the water can go underneath and you have professional expertise for that, or those ongoing stewardship plans that you can back this up to say, yes, this is a really great investment of public dollars that will ensure public access for a long time. So it's just a tool that we're using to help with this. And as I said, it's important to note that just because a project has those higher climate risks doesn't mean it won't be selected. It just means we want to see it in the design and the stewardship plan that you are clearly thinking about that. And again, this is coming out of the learnings of the last 2 years, is that trails that were taking these things into consideration that you'll see in this resilience form, they're faring better just because they were prepared and designed to be able to handle it in an entirely different way that our older infrastructure ever was when it was built, before these things were thought about in the same way, before we fully understood what we were seeing in this day-to-day. Thinking about budgets for RTP, we want you to think about your budget. You have that up to $50,000 ask that you can make, plus your 20% match. But your budget should be thorough, detailed, and accurate, and really be the best estimate for your costs. We can't fund contingency lines through RTP. That's not a piece, but you can build in for inflation within your budget. And there's information in the pre-application guidance to address this. And we'll probably cover it in the next webinar as well, but please plan for inflation. That's a piece. If you're getting quotes now for work that might happen 2 summers from now, we expect the costs to change. That's been the trend over the last few years. And so just build that into your mental math. Is just because you got a quote saying something is going to cost $25,000, don't, build your cushion into your budget within the budget lines to be able to say what that is so that you have enough funding to do your work. Because RTP is one of the grants that we can't go back and give you more money later. Like, this is a piece, is like the award. If you're selected, the award you get is the money we have. So we don't have a mechanism with which to add funds. So it's really good to make sure your budget plan covers everything. And there are some pieces like think through staff versus contractors in terms of what those costs would be, because within staff, we can cover staff time as well as the benefits for the staff that are involved either in the construction, the planning, or the project administration. Same for the contractors. Like if you're going to contract a specialist, to contract a construction company, contract a project manager, you can do both of those. But our guidance does have a little bit of pointers back and forth because some things just have different reporting and different documentation than others. So we encourage you, if you're thinking about who will do the work, and that's something that's still to be decided, please read through the additional materials that are posted online. And as Marlena said earlier, RTP is a grant program that requires a 20% match, and that's 20% of the total project costs. So your request plus your match equals the total project cost. And in the pre-application guidance, we have some charts of examples and like how to calculate it. The budget template that we have given you calculates this yourself, or it'll calculate this automatically. And so we just need you to be able to show at least a 20% match. That's the minimum. If you have more match than that, that's fine. That is completely fine. And one of the things that we like to always call out is it is a cash match or an in-kind match that is eligible. So if you have volunteers that are participating in this work, you can count that volunteer labor towards your match. It doesn't always have to be financial. And so know that while it does have that matching requirement, we've often heard, because we now reference and recommend that if you don't have an established rate, that folks use the independent sector's value of volunteer time for Vermont, which is over $30 an hour. And we've had groups that come in and are like, we didn't think we were going to have enough match. And then all of a sudden they applied that rate to their estimated 100 hours to the project. And then we're able to come up with those last pieces. And so just think critically through that of like that cash or that in-kind opportunity. So thinking about our budgets, going a little bit more into what is eligible and what is not. Some things that are eligible for RTP. It will fund some planning, if there's final plans, final designs, permitting costs. If your project is determined to need an archaeological resource assessment or an ARA, all of that is an eligible cost. Those sort of final planning, permitting pieces. We can fund project administration. It can fund construction design, surveying, and engineering, labor, tools, materials, supplies, equipment rentals, publication research and design fees, and then acquisition costs. Things that RTP cannot fund, any costs related to ineligible activities. And this is also, these ineligible lists apply both to the request for RTP as well as the match. So for example, marketing was listed as an ineligible activity for this. So you can't use marketing dollars as match for your RTP project. RTP won't fund lodging and food. It won't fund expenses that are already incurred before the grant agreements are signed, with one exception, and that's if we tell you your project needs an archaeological resource assessment, then we'll fund that after it's been approved by the Federal Highway Administration. But there's a really specific window for that. So on the whole, RTP won't fund anything before the grant agreement is signed for our standard track. Flood recovery is one that has some unique circumstances because those projects are supposed to be done, right? Like by the application period. So flood recovery is the other exception to that. Expenses that don't meet procurement requirements are a piece that's there. So say you had a contract for your project manager and just hired a long-term volunteer on your organization to do that contract without seeking other competitive bids. That's something for the state. Like if it is a contract, it really does need to have follow some procurement pieces. And there are links in the guidance to like what those are, and we spell it out for folks. Long story short, you have to just try to at least solicit 3 bids. And if you don't pick the lowest cost, you just have to be able to have in writing an explanation why. What was the criteria that you looked at? And so it's not meant to be an additional burden, but it is something to keep in mind, because if you just hire someone you know, it could get into a gray area in terms of that reimbursement eligibility. And then the last piece that is ineligible is anything that is above and beyond what is in the grant agreement when we finalize that. And so it's not the opportunity to add other pieces in unless you talk to our grant staff first. As I mentioned before, there's that kind of piece. It's important to, when working with contractors, that it's a good idea for your budget to reach out for estimates in advance. The best practice is to get 3 estimates, but if you can't get that, you can make your budget estimates based on like the information you get, or if you are an organization that is currently administering active trail projects, you could base it on like costs for that. I know some groups say like they know that this many linear feet based on their experience is so many dollars a foot. And if they have that based on current projects, that's an okay thing to reference your budget on. We recommend strongly against basing your budget estimates on like quotes that you got a year ago. Construction costs, materials costs, all of it has changed in the last year. So please get up-to-date estimates and be a best piece that you really informs the budget of what you can get. And the big one, as I mentioned, there's the procurement guidance, but unless you are a flood recovery, do not sign a contract until after you have a grant agreement. And this is we're gonna send these slides out in advance. And so this is hyperlinked in there. You will get this as a follow-up. So we just wanna make sure that that is a state requirement that we can't waive. Landowner permission is another piece that is important for the application phase. And we share it now, not because you need landowner permission for the pre-application, but because by the full application. So as you're going through your planning, looking at the next 3 months, if you do not own 100% of the land where your project, like your organization does not own 100% of the land, you need to get signed landowner permission. And how long that permission needs to be depends on what type of work you're doing. So we have this all lined up. It's 1 year if you're grooming snow, 5 years for general maintenance or small installations, 10 years for new trails or larger projects, and 25 years for, say, large permanent facilities like engineered bridges or bathrooms or pavilions. And so on our website, we do have a series of forms. We actually even have our own flood recovery form because that's a special 5-year permission. So we have permission forms on the website right now you can download. But if you don't already, as I said, own that land, we encourage you to start thinking about what is your plan to get landowner permission, because we know working with grantees who are working with private landowners, we will, RTP funds work on private lands. It funds work on business-owned land. It funds work on town lands, and you don't have to be the town putting it in, but you need permission from the landowner. And all of those entities, depending on what's going on in their schedules, their lives, their times, their timelines. Sometimes that permission process can be extended to get. It can take a while, whether we had private landowners who were out of the country and away from email for a month and a half, or businesses that need to wait until the next CEO who is incoming is officially established before they'll grant permission. And so start those conversations earlier rather than later, because you will need them for the full application. You will have to submit signed landowner permissions at that point by the end of January if you're selected to move forward. Permits are the other pieces. We've had a lot of questions come up in the past. And so for the pre-application, there's really two online tools, or two mechanisms for the Department of Environmental Conservation, or DEC, that will help us do this. And so it's either a permit navigator report, which is an online tool that you just do yourself, and that's for single location based projects. If you have a really long linear project, or a project that's happening in multiple places, then you need another tool called a project review sheet. And that is one that needs DEC staff review for. And so we really recommend you start that process at least 1 month before the deadline. Like in the next 3 weeks, you should start that if you need a project review sheet, just because that staff who works at DEC needs time to go through them. And even if you are working on your own land, this is something that's going to be required. And so there are two tools. As I said, it has to do mostly with the shape of the parcels, what you're going to need to do. And so whether you need that permit navigator or the project review sheet. And either tool that you use, this is the first step. And so this is something that's really important to know, that just because you completed your project review sheet doesn't mean you have permits. It means you have a list of potential permits and the permit specialists, their contact information for your location, to follow up with them. And so if you have permits that are flagged in either of these pieces, these reports, your job is to follow up with the contacts identified. And in many cases, they might say, no, you don't need a permit. You're fine. In which case you can keep going with your project as planned. Sometimes they might say, yes, you do need a permit. And if you do need a permit, then you want to make sure that you get estimates, that you really build that into your work plan and budget. We've had stories in the past of folks who say, we thought we needed a wetlands permit, and they didn't realize they needed a wetlands delineation. And they're coming up with these additional expenses that are in some cases tens of thousands of dollars more than they had planned, to be able to do the project as planned. And sometimes they just say, well, we're going to tweak the project. We're going to move the trail so it's not going through the wetland versus doing this wetland cost. And other times they have to come up with the funding to cover those additional costs. So it's really good to know that going into your planning phase of exactly what are you going to need to do, and to be able to plan for it appropriately, both for your timeline and your budget. And the last, kind of piece we wanted to go over with this, in terms of these obligations, things you should know about with RTP, is that as a federally funded program, there are additional compliance requirements that come with this. Those compliance requirements fall into a few buckets. The first is fiscal compliance. The state has certain paperwork that needs to be completed and to be able to be signed. Things like W-9s, there's an insurance requirement, a business office risk assessment. We check for being in good standing with the state and federal government for that. We're looking for environmental compliance. Do you have your permits? Can we fulfill NEPA obligations? The northern long-eared bats. Does your project going to impact those? We need to be able to report on that to Federal Highway. RTP also has a provision in place that says unless your project meets a designated exemption, that project should be universally accessible. Here in Vermont, many of our RTP projects qualify for one of the exemptions, as one of the exemptions is terrain, in that it is physically too steep to make it accessible. Like we can't get over the terrain piece. And there is some information in the pre-application guidance that goes into this a bit more, but just know that unless your project qualifies for exemptions, you can't just choose not to make it universally accessible through RTP. If you can't justify why you're not investing that time, that funding, you really should be submitting an accessible trail project. And the last compliance bucket that we have to work through is historical preservation, which is section 106 of at the federal level, which involves potentially some additional review depending on the scope of work you're doing. And we're going to cover more of that later in our sessions to be able to do that. And then we've got some more in our guidance about it as well. But it's just something to know that like going for an RTP grant, because it is federal money, there are additional strings attached that you just have to work through. But RTP will cover all of those costs. So that is the upside of it. It's like RTP will cover them. They're eligible for reimbursement. So we know that this is the beginning, not the end with you. And so as Marlena has mentioned, we have a pre-application guidance document that we strongly recommend folks review that breaks down both project planning pieces as well as the how do I do the templates pieces. We're also going to be having a webinar on Thursday, November 7th at 3 p.m. specifically focused on the pre-application materials. We're going to walk through those items one by one and help do technical troubleshooting, explain questions that might be unclear, and really work through those all so that everybody understands how to do this. Recognizing that RTP submissions come from a huge variety of backgrounds, from folks who have professional grant writers on staff to all volunteer towns or all volunteer run town projects. And so no matter where you are, we want to make sure you get that support you need. We're going to have 2 open office hours. These are going to be opportunities truly for just live Q&A the whole time. Like we came to this session with slides ready to talk at you, right? That is the piece. We're going to open up for questions here in just a minute. But we have 2 sessions planned that are really just for you. You can register for these on our website now that are really our open spaces to dig in. And the first one, we will spend a fair bit of time. We want to hold the first potentially 30 minutes for flood recovery questions. But after that, it's fair game with anybody's questions as we go. Because we don't, unfortunately, even with our growing team, for those of you who have been around for a while, you might be recognizing some new faces on our grants team. We have some additional capacity. We are growing. But even within that, we don't have the capacity to meet one-to-one with every applicant during the pre-application phase. And so with that, these office hours are a great time if you want to get FaceTime with us to ask those questions live. And if that doesn't work, you can always reach us by email. So that anr.fprrecreationgrants@vermont.gov. And so with that, I'll go ahead and pause here at this point and open it up to you about any questions that you have. And so I'll tag in Marlena, maybe, were there any questions in the chat that have not yet been answered?
None in the chat, but I do see Sarah's hand.
All right, Sarah, go ahead.
Thank you. I was trying to figure out how to unmute myself. I have a couple questions. I'll just start with one and then let other people ask questions. I don't want to dominate, but one question is about universal accessibility. My goal is to create a perimeter trail around our school property, and I've met with a professional trail builder who gave me some estimates for making it just an earthen trail versus an accessible trail with SurePack or whatever kind of material you need for it to make it accessible. And he said with the SurePack, it would be at least 10 times as expensive and it would exceed the $50,000 price tag. Whereas to just create an earthen trail that kids could walk on and ski on and run on, you know, we have all these goals. You know, we could do that for under $10,000. Can you speak to that? Do we what do we do?
Yeah, that's a great piece, and it's a good question, and one that it is tricky to answer. I would say you have a couple of options for you. One is to like not knowing your project details. Like I've just got this high level piece here is that I'm going to encourage you to go to the pre-application guidance and review those 4 exemptions. Because maybe there's another one that fits when you're like, actually, this is exactly why we can't do it. It's not just like, is it just cost or is there something else? We qualified for this exemption. So that could be a piece like, do you qualify for one of the exemptions one way or the other? And that is truly going to be like project driven design. Because I know when you're talking about like water crossings, right? Like if there's a dip in a drain, a bridge versus not a bridge is like just a really fundamental difference in terms of the cost and the structures. So just, I would check that out first. The other piece to be able to say with that is to think about your project and to see, is this a phased project? You know, Could you do half a loop that would get you, or an out and back, right? That would be an accessible trail that you could do with RTP this time. And then in a future round, you could apply again to make it a loop and still have a substantive experience. Because particularly with school grounds, right? Like you have kids with all levels of abilities, you have kids with all levels of needs. And so to think about that as your opportunity to say like, well, we can't do our big dream yet, but we could do a part 1 and a part 2 maybe. Or you could do a part 1 with RTP and then leverage those funds to fundraise for through another source to say, we already have this much, will you match? Can we build it up and gather those additional supports? So that could be an option. The third option I will say is like for large scale projects, not knowing what your total price tag is that RTP is not a fit for this. Like it is limited for this for non-motorized projects with that $50,000. If you're a motorized project, so snowmobiling, ATVing, dirt bike trails, those sorts of things, like that has no cap on it. And that's because of that 30, 40, 40 federal requirement. About 30% of the funds have to go to motorized projects. And we just recognize that those are fewer and far between in Vermont. And they sometimes just need more money when you're building a snowmobile trail versus a pedestrian trail or a biking trail. So we do have another program that Marlena mentioned, the Land and Water Conservation Fund. That one opens next week. And so one of the things that is really different about that is like it will fund big projects. So if it is a one swoop need to do it together, because sometimes there is that impetus, there is that importance to do it together, but LWCF is fundamentally different, that it is a mandatory 50-50 match, which is a little bit different. I will say, RTP, and I'm just going to go down this rabbit hole real fast for folks. RTP is one of the few federal sources of funds that is eligible as a source of match for LWCF. But if you're planning to go for an LWCF grant for a project, we recommend that you don't apply for RTP this year for it. The timelines don't match. But if you applied for LWCF this year and then RTP next year, you should be able to implement roughly at the same period of time. So if you're coming to this thinking how you could balance these two opportunities that FPR offers, I wouldn't recommend applying for the same project this year for both. So does that, I know I just went on a lot. Did that kind of answer your main question, Sarah, or was there another one in there?
I think that does answer my main question. So once I look at the exemptions, I might have further questions because it's not a huge project. It's only 3/4 of a mile. And
you might get more estimates too. That is a piece. You
Well,
might get more estimates too, and find some different numbers. So
yes, actually, yeah. I'll wait and see if anyone else has other questions, but I do have a question about estimates too.
cool. Thank you, Joanne. I think yours is the next hand up. Muting, it's coming, it's hiding. It's always hiding when you need it, right? The button there.
Oh, I see it. Okay.
There you go. You
Okay.
got it.
Hi, very much for the opportunity to ask a question. So we have a project that has been phased because we have a large chunk of grant funding, but we needed more. Costs and increased unexpectedly. So we have all of our permits in place, thankfully. We're shovel ready. The piece that's missing that concerns me, and I want to make sure I understood you, Lauren, is the contractor. The project went out to bid. We selected a contractor, and right now we're working with the town and the engineering company and the contractor to sign a contract. Now the contractor wants to do the whole project, and he's guaranteed prices through a certain time in 2025 if we can access more funding. You said don't sign a contract. So tell me more about that. Does that mean we should only sign a contract for the phases that the other funding covers? We don't want to sign it and then you say, or your committee say, it's too late. Because we haven't signed on the dotted line as far as I know.
Joanne, since we are, I think, the funder of the other grant that is in a big portion of this. So for folks on the call, I know a little bit more about this project than is what's being shared. But since this is another project that FPR is funding, will you follow up with this via email to me, and I will confirm with the business office just to see if there are some additional circumstances in play. Because this is one of those cases in point where we as the grants team don't get to always make all the rules. Right. And so sometimes there are these nuances that we have to tag in our other teammates or other state policies to ensure that we're following full compliance. So Joanne, this is one of those questions that if you can follow up, I'd be happy to talk through that and make sure that I'm giving you the full and correct answer.
Thank you, Lauren.
Because it is a unique piece in that we are already the funder for the phase 1 work with a different program. So.
Okay, perfect.
But I think there are some federal requirements in there that would make this really tricky. So I'll have to dig into that more. So thank you. Sarah, did you have I guess, was it question number, the next one up? And you're muted, but yes.
Yes, okay. So my other question is about contractors. So far I do have 2 estimates. So it sounds like I need to get another. So once I have 3 estimates, then do I submit all 3 with my application, or at what point do I choose a contractor?
You choose a contractor after the project has been selected and after it has been approved by Federal Highway. That's a piece right there. It's like, that is when you get to choose. And so really this piece of like reaching out now is to understand your budget. And so if you can't get the 3rd one, that's okay, because knowing with contractors, you could say, I have one contract that says, yeah, we can do that for 10 grand. And the other contractor says it's 100 grand. And so you're like, what do you want to put in your budget? Because I would encourage you not to, like, if it is dramatically different, don't just go with the lowest answer, because like, what if the company that was the lowest answer decides that they are moving to Arizona because they are done with this wintry fall business, y'all. I'm from the South. If you can't hear it, it's coming out in my mouth. And the y'all's right there. But like that could happen. So that would be the piece, is like you should wait until after you have the grant agreement executed to sign that contract. So this is about budget information at this stage in the game. So you're asking for the right number.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Carol, I think you're next.
Oh, hi. This is also working with Joanne from town of Wilmington on the same project. So nice to see you. I couldn't write in the chat, by the way. It says only available during the meeting. So anyway, I was curious. You said you can't put a contingency in, which the engineers and contractors often do, and you said you used inflation, but wouldn't there be a set inflation rate that would be used? I mean, you can't say 50%, or you just can't randomly say something. Do you have an inflation rate, or?
We don't have an established firm inflation rate, because like within RTP, it varies so much across the different types of work. And so if your contractor is giving you a quote for contingencies and that's what you want to pull in, and like make sure are those contingencies actually contingencies in terms of like things coming up, or those contingencies that are like actually project management fees by another name. So to like tease that apart. And so we're saying, just again, this is the budget piece to understand how much money to do that. And I say that like RTP, you need to be able to explain it. And then the ranking committee is ultimately the ones that makes the recommendation. Ranking committee that does make those final determinations. And there have been pieces in the past where, somebody said it is a 50% inflation rate. They're like, that's a lot. Why? And if you can have a really solid why, like, I still think 50% is going to be way too high. But like, if you're thinking about a year or two, a 5 to 10% inflation rate is completely reasonable, and something that is pretty standard across the board is a 5 to 10% rate. So it just depends on what you're looking at in those numbers. And I don't mean to be super gray in that place, but it's really different. Like if your project is volunteers building a bridge and like it is just the materials of pressure treated lumber for inflation versus like working with a contractor to do like a project that is the scope and scale of yours. So it's harder to put it in that finalized piece.
So it's either going to be wages and inflation with that, or materials inflation.
Yeah,
so.
Or both.
Okay, thanks. Right.
Yeah. Alex, I think you're on deck next. Oh, and you're muted. Hello.
Awesome. Hi, thanks so much. This has been super helpful. Alex Showerman. I'm the Trails Director for the Waterbury Area Trails Alliance. So we maintain mountain bike and multi-use trails in Waterbury. Kind of have a few different projects in mind for RTP and just had questions about timing and also like contractor selection. Right now we're working on a project in partnership with FPR. It's going through the approval process and everybody's feeling really good about it for rehabilitation and long-term climate resilience of the climb at Perry Hill, as well as bringing it into kind of both adaptive and green beginner-friendly climbs because it accesses our beginner trails. So it's something we feel we're really excited about. It's going to be shovel ready for spring. And we were hoping to try and have it done kind of before peak season because it is right at the most like high traffic part of our thing. Unfortunately, it sounds like projects can't be implemented until July.
No, well, and part of that is like so with the RTP, right? Like when
Yeah.
we select our projects, we have to submit that to Federal Highway for them to authorize, and nothing can happen until they authorize it. And so we're like cooking behind the scenes, but this is as literally as quick as we can expect that turnaround to happen.
And then the other sort of question with regards to timing is it sounds like to be in compliance with the like contractor selection process, we can't really do that until we have an agreement in hand.
Yep.
Yeah. So kind of then it basically sounds like because all of our contractors like essentially book this time of year for next year's projects. So it feels like this would have what we were hoping pushing into 2026. Like I think it was kind of the realistic thing, but this project we really probably shouldn't let sit for another year because like it was a problem area that then the storms made significantly worse and now it's not rideable and people are riding an unsanctioned trail. So not feeling like we should push this to 2026. We do have two other possible projects in the pipeline. One is a new trail construction on private land, but would be publicly accessible. And we have already like phasing mapped out and also smaller chunks that we could apply for 2026. But it seems like the maintenance one is a little bit like maintenance and kind of climate like is a little more of a competitive application.
Yeah, and that's a tricky spot to be in.
I don't know. I think I'm just trying to understand timelines and maybe it might be, I know you get a lot of questions, but I feel like we have like lots of different competitive and like kind of trying to decide what project to apply. I could probably use some guidance with because we have a few options and just figuring out which one's going to be the most competitive and also work timeline wise.
Yeah, well, I will say works with the timeline is going to be what gets you to the competitive review. Does not work. Like we had proposals that came in last year for work that happened before the spring, and those were ones that we said you're not going to move forward to the full application because we don't want you to invest that time in it because it's not eligible. This is not something we can change. It's not eligible. So I mean, it sounds like for that other project, you might have to like go looking for other funding sources or figure like, is there something you could do to do a short piece now and then like really dig in 2026 when you have that time. And so that prioritization is a piece. Yeah. And you can do multiple submissions. So that is a piece like you could do multiple submissions. RTP applications are a decent amount of work. But we won't say no to them. But chances are if you're selected through the standard RTP track, you'll only be selected for one. With that. So I would just use that judiciously in terms of thinking through what is your organization's greatest priority and like what really is the best fit for this program.
So we can submit to like we could submit to proposals and then the team can basically kind of be like, oh, we like this one better.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
But you have to then submit to proposals, which is a lot of work. So I'm not gonna talk you out of that, but I just that is a lot of work.
Yeah, good to great. I can also check with FPR. I know because they're knowledgeable. My contacts at FPR are knowledgeable of the program, so I can chat with them and kind of weighing the pros and cons of each potential one. We do have like maintenance and climate resilience. Like we do have a phased out plan, but we're not really, I don't think like our 2026 maintenance work at Perry is like ready for application. So yeah.
Lots to
I have
think
one
about
other
for sure.
question about contractors, but I don't want to, I want to make sure we're going through other people.
Thank you for that, Alex. So maybe we'll ping to Sarah and see if anybody else has anyone after that and then come back to you. So Sarah.
Thank you. I think this question is hopefully quick. I have a question about the match, and you mentioned using volunteer labor. Is there, so one question about that, where do I find the information about how to quantify that?
In the pre-application guidance.
Okay, perfect. And covers the project administration and management. Can that qualify as a match as well? And how would I quantify that? Does that depend on how much that person gets paid by the organization?
Yep.
Okay. Great. Thank you. That's it for now.
Yeah, thank you. Looks like Alex, we're back to you.
All right. A question on the like contractor selection. So we have a number of like a select number of contractors that we have really good relationships with and have had work done that's really quality. There's also been like a lot of kind of newer, like in the mountain bike space, newer trail builders pop up that are less experienced and less reputable. But one concern I kind of have is like how do we protect against like somebody coming in and like way underbidding, but like maybe their work isn't as proven or good? Like how do we kind of protect with such a specialized and also sort of easy to get into field that is mountain bike trail building?
Yeah, I am going to encourage you really to look at the procurement guidance for grantees for more.
Yeah.
So like that's going to be like your long answer. The short answer is going to be is that even within the state, so for procurement in general, right, with contractors, is that if your organization has written established procurement policies that are fair, promote open competition, like protect against conflict of interest, like you should follow those first. If you don't have those, then the state has pieces in play, which many small nonprofits don't. And that's okay. You know, we have pieces in play, but there is, even for the state, there's no obligation to, like, if you're going through a multiple bidding process, to select and go with the lowest quote. You just have to have established criteria of why not. Like, what else are you looking at as beyond cost? Like, what were those criteria and why did that person, you know, or that business meet those criteria better than the other ones? And just to have that on file so that if you're ever asked for it. But that is the piece, right? Is the like, it kind of goes back and forth. Is there are sometimes things other than cost that can come into play of like, well, we recognize that, you know, this one said that it wouldn't they would guarantee that it wouldn't be over this price versus this one said we think it's this price plus and minus, or those years of experience, or you know, this one is doing hand built trails, these ones are doing machine built trails, it's a different for us. Like there are different criteria you can look at for that.
So like,
but check out the procurement guidance for that, like as you're thinking forward after federal highway gives the authorization and after a grant agreement is signed. So it is those after paces.
And things like years experience or like even like track record of success with past projects and like things like that are things that we can kind of put in procurement, like our procurement.
Like if it's your criteria. It's like for us at FPR, like this is not our role to say that, you know, like within our state system, sometimes we have things for women and minority owned businesses, like that can be an additional factor. Like your organization has to have your own criteria. So it just depends on what those are that you establish.
Awesome. Cool. That's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Well, I know we're over time. We wanted to stay and answer questions and really like get that piece there. As I said, this is not going to be the only opportunity to answer questions. So you will be getting this recording afterwards. You will be getting the slides and some follow-up resources. But otherwise, we hope if you continue to have questions about the RTP program, you join us at a future webinar or office hours. So with that, thank you everyone so much and have a lovely rest of your afternoon.
Thank you all.